Furthermore, the FBI will continue to be objective in its investigations and will stay within the bounds of its authorized jurisdiction, regardless of pressure groups which seek to use the FBI to attain their own selfish aims to the detriment of our people as a whole. In furtherance of our service to each citizen, we daily pledge our fidelity, bravery, and integrity.
I, Thomas A. Halliday, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against enemies, foreign and domestic.
Tonight, with the midterm election season heating up, tensions are mounting. Some Democrats are bracing for big midterm losses.
The nation. Voters have been heading to the polls in.
Political strategists were predicting a bloodbath for Democrats in this year's midterms after President Biden struggled to handle a slew of crises.
With the midterm elections fast approaching, Donald Trump seems to be on a roll. He's endorsed more than 200 Republican candidates and, by mid-August, was boasting a 92% win rate, cementing his status as a GOP kingmaker.
President Trump's endorsement on the Republican side is probably the most powerful, not probably, it is, the most powerful endorsement in the history of modern American politics.
Sitting Congressman and household name Liz Cheney is easily defeated by Trump-backed newcomer Harriet Hageman.
News Republican Liz Cheney, who went against her party and voted to impeach Donald Trump, lost her primary bid for re-election as Congresswoman from Wyoming, defeated by a Trump-endorsed candidate.
That I will do whatever it takes to ensure Donald Trump is never again anywhere near the Oval Office, and I mean it.
Cheney, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, is a vocal opponent of the former president and was among a handful of Republicans who voted to impeach him.
The significance is absolutely gargantuan. The significance of Liz Cheney's defeat is that the GOP is now America first.
Liz Cheney has always stood up for is the bureaucratic state that's run out of Washington, D.C., that has a stranglehold on this country right now.
Despite 6 years of negative media coverage, 2 impeachments, and an endless string of allegations, it's clear Trump is still popular. He's heavily teased a run for president in 2024, but hasn't yet made a public announcement.
I think he's now more likely to run than ever before.
Donald Trump, there's a good chance he's going to be the Republican challenger to Joe Biden in 2024.
But on August 8th, news breaks that the FBI has raided Trump's Florida home.
Former President Donald Trump says his Mar-a-Lago home has been raided by
just minutes ago.
The president wrote that a, quote, large group of FBI agents
has been investigating the discovery of classified information.
The interest lies in boxes of documents he brought back after leaving the White House.
Legal analysts saying this is an unprecedented move in American history.
It's quite an aggressive and extraordinary step.
Right about one thing, this is a truly unprecedented event.
But the follow-up to President Trump was grabbing Scott Perry's telephone. We're supposed to have oversight of the FBI, of the DOJ, and if they can come raid our office or take our telephones or take any information, this is so dangerous. It could spell an end to our constitutional republic. It's that serious.
America is shaken.
President Donald Trump is Joe Biden's most likeliest political opponent in 2024, and this is less than 100 days from critical midterm elections. The FBI raid of President Trump is a complete abuse and overreach of its authority. And as the American people know, unfortunately, this is the same agency leadership that protected Hillary Clinton, James Comey, and continues to protect Hunter Biden.
No matter what angle you're looking at this from, this is a tough time in our country. We have too much distrust in too many of our institutions, that are at the fabric of our democracy.
No one is above the law, not even a president.
The judge found probable cause to believe that there was a violation of the Espionage Act.
Is this simply evidence that nobody is above the law, even a former president? Or is America's justice system being weaponized against its own people? If we can't trust the people watching over us, who can we turn to? I met with legal experts and political insiders to find out what was happening. The search warrant shows that authorities believe that Trump may have illegally possessed classified records and national defense information. An inventory list filed by the FBI shows that agents took 11 sets of documents with classified markings.
Every president in the United States maintains the top security clearance even after they leave the White House. Jimmy Carter, George Bush, Bill Clinton all maintain top secret SCI, even Q clearances that pertain to nuclear weapons. So the idea that a former president somehow loses his ability to read classified materials is absurd.
And the president has the absolute authority to declassify documents. That is his constitutional duty.
Banal has represented Donald Trump in the past, but spoke to us in his own capacity.
The executive power resides solely in the president, and he has the sole authority to declassify things.
Well, there's no specifics. It's just a basic saying, listen, all of these documents I'm taking are declassified. I mean, this is not some bureaucratic process. And some bureaucrat doesn't have the ability to say, oh, Mr. President, you didn't dot the I across the T as to what is declassified. I mean, for goodness sakes, he's the president of the United States. He is the chief officer of the country.
Was the president abusing this constitutional authority, using it to withhold information?
This notion that they could have had it if they just asked nicely really does not measure up.
Is it possible the president wasn't cooperating with the DOJ and they had no choice but to come and just take the records?
They could have issued another subpoena to get particular documents that they wanted, so you wouldn't jump right to a search warrant.
Why didn't they just do what we normally do in those situations and call and say, hey, we think you have X, we want to review it, can you return it? Search warrant? You could have just issued a subpoena.
We know the president was cooperating with the National Archives. His lawyers had negotiated over several months. They just visited 2 months prior.
In June, there was an offer of cooperation, and the FBI and the Justice Department were there. That seems odd then to raid a place when you had cooperation.
So what was the FBI looking for exactly? It wants to keep that an absolute secret. At a hearing on August 18th, the DOJ told the judge not to release a single word of the affidavit used to obtain the search warrant. It said that would put its sources at risk and jeopardize its criminal investigation.
I certainly understand this is the way it typically works, that you don't get to see the affidavit unless and until there's actually an indictment released. I think when you're talking about an unprecedented raid on the former president of the United States, especially when looking at the attachment that was released with the warrant, it looks like a giant fishing expedition because it's all of the presidential records for the entire span of the Trump term. It's just remarkable. The Justice Department really should show us that affidavit.
There's both problems with how broad the warrant is, and there's problems with the way that they've executed it. For instance, there's absolutely no excuse and no reason why they should have taken the president's passport. That was absolutely unauthorized by the warrant. But when you have these FBI agents that just start rummaging through all his personal effects the way that they did on a warrant that is horribly broad.
The Fourth Amendment is the one that protects you from unreasonable searches and seizures. Certainly, the taking of the passports was not only unreasonable, but was also not on a warrant. So they basically collected something that which the warrant didn't allow them to do.
Trump later got his passports back, but without explanation. I had so many questions for the DOJ, but they did not respond to my interview request. So, I turned my attention to the next big question. Is this politically motivated?
You know, Andrew Cuomo, who is a hardcore left-wing Democrat who hates President Trump, when he tweets after the raid that the DOJ, Garland, better have a smoking gun to back up this raid or it will look like political persecution. If Andrew Cuomo says things like this, I think reasonable people understand this is a political theater.
What is it that justified going to the president, one of the most iconic presidential residences in U.S. history, and seizing every presidential record? That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. I can't imagine what the affidavit would say to justify a seizure that broad.
Bruce Reinhart, the magistrate judge who approved the Mar-a-Lago search, once criticized then-President Trump online, saying that he doesn't have the moral stature to kiss the feet of former Congressman John Lewis. Republicans highlighted Reinhart's past donations to Democrat President Obama and accused him of being a partisan.
Well, he had recused himself from a civil case involving President Trump, so I don't understand how you could possibly feel that you needed to recuse yourself from a case like that because you might be biased against President Trump, but that you could issue a search warrant against him. That doesn't compute.
You would think that the Department of Justice would have enough respect and that a magistrate judge would understand the gravity of what was before him in order to send the warrant to his superior, which is an actual district court Article 3 judge. So just that in itself strikes me as basically disrespectful of both the law and the institutions here in America by the Department of Justice.
Why not give this case to the most senior judge available? A.G. Landry's comments made me think. Such an important case. Magistrate Judge Reinhart was asked to decide whether or not a former president's home should be searched. Now he will decide how much, if anything, the public should know about the evidence he was given before he approved the raid. Reinhart has ordered the government to provide him with a redacted version of the affidavit. This version might then be released to the public.
This is exactly what we were going through in the years 2017 and 2018 when then Congressman Devin Nunes and Kash Patel, as lead investigator, were demanding that the Department of Justice declassify the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant that allowed them to spy on Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. It's the same thing. The FBI is hiding paper. The DOJ is hiding paper. And why? Will it reveal sensitive American secrets? No, of course not. It will reveal corruption.
I must have trained probably 5,000-6,000 FBI agents, intelligence analysts, and SOS support staff. So
Before joining the government, Sebastian Gorka ran a private company that trained the FBI's counterterrorism department.
I would travel the United States from field office, from FBI field office to FBI field office, training them on what ISIS believes, where Al-Qaeda came from. I did 20,000 miles a month. So for me back then, it's a great, it was a prideful moment for me when I'd arrive at an FBI field office. Now, I'm sorry, I'm heartbroken. If the FBI knocked on my door, I'd say, talk to my lawyers. This is now a politicized arm of the federal government that is using...
Gorka told me he distrusts the FBI and DOJ after what happened to then candidate Trump in 2015.
The most important thing to understand about the raid is not the raid itself. Or rather, the most important thing to understand about the raid is the context. The context of the FBI's raid has to be understood in terms of Russiagate.
Lee Smith is an investigative journalist and the author of the book, The Plot Against the President. The book chronicles how the Clinton campaign, the nation's intelligence apparatus, and journalists acted together to bring down the then incoming president by tying Trump to Russia.
This is often forgotten. They were actually spying on Donald Trump's campaign, then his transition team, and then the White House. So that started off the FBI's relationship with Donald Trump. Paul Sperry wrote an excellent article for Real Clear Investigations identifying some of the people who are involved in this investigation and saying that that several of them were also involved in the Russiagate.
What was absolutely outrageous?
John Mills is the former director of cybersecurity policy at the Department of Defense. where he held top-secret SCI security clearances since the 1980s. He told me about his involvement in the FBI's Trump-Russia probe.
A few days after the election, I was called on the top secret phone by a peer who urged me that it was most important that I participate in the creation of this document, an intel community assessment, to finalize the Russia story and potentially block or delay the inauguration of Trump in January. And he was absolutely giddy with excitement over this. It was absolutely stunning that I would be approached on that, and I could not believe it. And I'm reading a classified document, and I'm like, there's no meat here. There's no there. What's going on?
But Washington and the media went all in with the story, later known as Russiagate.
FBI Director James Comey dropped one bombshell after another on Capitol Hill today. For the first time, Comey publicly confirmed there is an FBI investigation underway into the Trump campaign's possible ties to Russia.
But we do know this. The Russians offered help. The campaign accepted help. The Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help. And that is pretty damning.
There was essentially nothing in the body of this very classified document that gave any evidence that Trump was a Russian asset. Yet the executive summary said Trump was a Russian asset. And I was told, stand down, no need to complete the staffing of the package. The Secretary of Defense has already signed off because Comey and Brennan are personally hands-on keyboard writing this document. You never get a director of Central Intelligence or FBI personally writing documents and typing documents. Well, as we know from the summer of 2020 with Rick Grinnell and John Ratcliffe, their declassification, we now know that Comey and Brennan knew the Russia story was fake in summer of 16. So I was staffing a fake document, which I did not know at the time. Comey and Brennan were lying.
Did this investigation, as they do all their work, in a competent, honest, and independent way?
17 significant errors in the FISA process, and you say that it was handled in a thoughtful and appropriate way.
Yeah, he's right. I was wrong. I was overconfident in the procedures that the FBI and Justice had built over 20 years.
Comey was later fired by the president, but before he left, he appointed former director of the FBI, Robert Mueller, as the special counsel to investigate Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. But after spending $32 million in the investigation, Mueller found no evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia.
And the Mueller special counsel was a continuation of Russiagate. They had the same people involved in that investigation. There were the same charges that Donald Trump and his campaign had colluded with Russia. Once they found no evidence of collusion, because the whole thing was preposterous from the very beginning, they moved on to obstruction. But of course, you'll hear the media talk about, oh, there's plenty of evidence of obstruction. The idea of obstructing the investigation of a non-crime is ridiculous. There was no crime. Donald Trump didn't coordinate with Russia. He didn't conspire with Russia. He didn't collude with Russia.
Trump is not the only one facing legal battles. As the January 6th committee and the Justice Department continue their investigations into the January 2021 Capitol breach and Trump's efforts to challenge the 2020 election results, more people close to Trump are getting visits by the police. This June, the FBI raided the home of Jeffrey Clark, a former Justice Department official.
In the early hours of June 22nd, the FBI raided the home of Jeffrey Clark. The Trump-era Justice Department official had attempted to investigate allegations of election fraud on behalf of the former president.
They kind of pushed open the door all the way, and they're like, you have to come outside. And I asked several times, can I put my pants on? They wouldn't, so they brought me out into my driveway, held me for 5 minutes while they swept the house.
Clark says the federal agents took all of his electronic devices.
I don't even know why that was necessary. I think it's just part of the tactics to try to increase pressure on those around President Trump.
He wasn't alone.
GOP activists, Republican Party chairs, and even a state Senate president are getting hit with subpoenas.
despite the fact that I have nothing to do with January 6th. I was an observer in the front row at the White House listening to my former boss, but they subpoenaed not only my phone records, but the phone records of my wife and my children. So this has nothing to do with any crime. My colleague, Peter Navarro, is arrested on a misdemeanor by an FBI SWAT team at Reagan Airport and put in leg irons disgusts me.
The whole thing about prosecutors and law enforcement is that they have discretion. I don't think that there's any reason why a man of Peter Navarro's age and stature, you know, a PhD economist who'd served honorably in the administration, should be treated like that. I don't think he was about to board the plane with a series of weapons. So it's really difficult to imagine what could justify that. I think that it's part of an intimidation effort.
The judge overseeing Navarro's case later expressed concern about the manner of his arrest.
The House Democrats
Navarro's case reminded me of what happened to Roger Stone when Trump and his allies were falsely accused of colluding with Russia.
For Roger Stone, they had, you know, dozens of agents. They had a land presence. They appeared like by kind of amphibious invasion because I think his house abutted, you know, a waterway or intracoastal.
Stone is a political consultant and a longtime friend of Donald Trump. I wanted to learn more about his experience with the FBI.
But at 6 a.m. On January 25th, 2019, 29 fully SWAT-clad FBI agents who arrived in 17 armored vehicles with a government helicopter overhead and 2 FBI boats pulling up to the dock behind my house, disgorging frogmen, all of them brandishing M4 fully automatic assault weapons, stormed my home to arrest me for the first time nonviolent crime of allegedly, at that point, lying to Congress. The irony of this, of course, is that they had spoken to my attorneys on the phone. The special counsel's office had spoken to my attorneys on the phone the day before. Normally, in a situation like this, they would merely inform my lawyers that I was going to be charged and that I should turn myself in. And of course, I would have. We need all of Mr. Stone's emails and text messages. Once they got them, they found no evidence of any of those things, nor did they find any evidence of Russian collusion or collaboration with WikiLeaks. I gather the purpose of this was intimidation, and also to serve as a warning to others who might resist the Mueller Inquisition.
Stone sees similarities between his ordeal and the raid on Trump's home.
They're very analogous. Here's why. Just as they could have contacted me and suggested I turn myself in voluntarily, they could have gone into federal court, got a temporary restraining order preventing Trump from moving the records, and sued him demanding their return. Meaning that the raid was completely unnecessary. This could have been pursued through the courts, but they choose the dramatic raid on purpose. And then additionally, it's the same game of redaction. In other words, all the documents pertaining my arrest were redacted. And in this case now, the affidavit, which is a document in which the government makes the argument to the judge as to why they must proceed in this way and approve the raid, that's going to be redacted. That's worthless.
Is the law applied equally in America? Is it truly blind to political affiliation? Or are some treated different than others?
If you look at things that notable Democrats have done, and then you see how they were treated, and then you see how the equivalent potential offense or infraction is being treated if it's on the Republican side, especially on the kind of, President Trump MAGA side, it looks like there's a divergence, and that causes, people in America to get upset and worry, are they really seeing a neutral enforcement of the law?
While Secretary of State, she wrote and sent at least 6 emails using her private server that contained what the government now says is classified information.
I said, I see evidence of great carelessness, but I do not see evidence that is sufficient to establish that Secretary Clinton or those with whom she was corresponding both talked about classified information on email and knew when they did it, they were doing something that was against the law. Right? So given that assessment of the facts, my understanding of the law, my conclusion was and remains, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. No reasonable prosecutor would bring the second case in 100 years focused on gross negligence.
Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
This apparent unequal application of the law made me think, is our government still of the people, by the people, and for the people?
Right at the end of my career, I realized we are operating in an unconstitutional, non-constitutional way. The people own the government. It's not the other way around. However, when you're in the seat, when you're in meetings at the White House, which I was on the National Security Council at the end of the Bush, beginning of the Obama period, at the senior levels of the Department of Defense, there is this atmosphere and attitude that we know best. The American people work for us, and we'll tell them what to do, even those who claim to be conservatives. It's very scary.
A recent poll found that more than 60% of Americans think there's a group of unelected officials in Washington who pursue their own interests and agendas rather than the policies of the elected president.
The career bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. that ran everything, the administrative state, deep state, the swamp, whatever you really want to call it, there's no way that you can vote out these career bureaucrats at the Department of Justice, at the FBI, at the IRS. You can't vote those bureaucratic officials out. And that lack of a check and balance on them, that is what the founders warned us about.
Banal said this was long the status quo in Washington, until Donald Trump.
I am officially running for President of the United States.
Literally from George Washington to Barack Obama, every single chief executive has been a retired general, former senator, congressman, or governor. Every single one. For the first time in American history, in 2015, we chose somebody who was none of those things. Never served in public office, never ran for public office, never served in the military. 64 million Americans said no to the ruling elite on both sides. And that's what makes him very dangerous. Donald Trump, as a human being, as a man who is now a politician, is not owned by anybody. Not Big Pharma, not oil, not the unions. Nobody owns him. And as a result, he is lethal to the vested interests in this city, left and right.
For the first time, really in modern American history, period, you have somebody that's going to stand up to the bureaucracy that says that I don't answer to you. I answer to the American people, and I answer to the Constitution.
Trump represents change. Trump represents the American people actually having control of their government instead of the other way around.
Do you think Trump's opponents are surprised how popular his endorsements have proved?
Yes, I do. And I think the reason for that is because Trump's opponents spend too much time in Washington, D.C. And I think there's a lot of us sometimes that spend a little bit too much time in Washington, D.C., where the way people think in this town is very different from the way that people think in real America. When you get outside the Beltway, when you talk to real Americans, they get it. They understand that they've been ignored by the people in Washington, D.C. for years. That it's the people in Washington, D.C. that think they're above the law. And while people in this town may think that's normal, people in America don't. And so that's where I think the surprise is that Donald Trump understands Americans.
Why is it important for the DOJ and the FBI to maintain and preserve their credibility among the American people? What happens if they don't?
I think that that's always been a hallmark of the United States, that we're dealing with, having worked with a lot of career lawyers at the Justice Department, having worked with law enforcement officials in different agencies, that there are a lot of, very honorable, hardworking people. But I think that if that ethos is destroyed because it's being politicized, and because the department at the highest levels is starting to look at turning tools against their political opposition, that's just not the kind of country I think we want to live in. I just don't recognize a country like that.
Anyone, whether you're a libertarian, a Democrat, an independent, you should want the FBI to be apolitical. When it comes to law enforcement, when it comes to the judiciary, the saying stands. It should be the application of law without prejudice, and also it must look as if the law is applied without prejudice. It's not just the matters of the case, simply the impression or the imputation that you are biased is bad, and the FBI has lost all credibility.
And I think that the Bureau, other law enforcement agencies, they have a certain amount of credibility capital, and they get that capital from neutral enforcement of the law and from not just going after political opponents.
I think this is and has been an incredible, dangerous inflection point in history. That set a dangerous precedent over America. So everyone in America, everybody who is not falling in line, you are a target.
Sebastian Gorka's parents fled communist Hungary for the United Kingdom. His father often recounted how he was persecuted by the communist regime.
If you were too loud as a conservative, if you were too effective, if you wrote the wrong article in one of the few conservative newspapers, knock, 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 the Hungarian IRS would be there next day to audit everything that you own. So, yes, I've seen this before, but I never thought I'd see it in America.
6 years of investigations into Trump and his supporters, along with the growing power of the nation's justice and security agencies, has made many worried.
I assume that what's going to happen is the Department of Justice is going to indict Donald Trump, and that will push the country into a very dangerous place.
Are you saying they may still try to charge the president with something, even though you're saying he hasn't done anything wrong, so they can bring him to Washington, D.C. to try him?
It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they tried to do that. It would still shock me, and that is the scary moment that we live in right now, where things that are shocking, things that shock the conscience of life as an American, of our freedom, of our liberty, of our Constitution, no longer surprise us. We almost expect it, because we've seen so many offenses towards the Constitution in recent years that we almost expect them to do it, because they know that they're going to find a jury in Washington, D.C. that is going to be willing to convict him before they even hear an opening statement, because Donald Trump has always stood up against the D.C. bureaucracy, and Washington, D.C. is where those bureaucrats he stood up against is where they live. And so they'd be very happy to convict him of whatever he's accused of. It's impossible to get a fair trial in this town. Roger Stone showed that.
It's very simple. Stand up for the truth. Never, never, never censor yourself. Like Václav Havel and many others have said, Solzhenitsyn, one man telling the truth can lead to the collapse of a dictatorial regime. I went to a conservative event recently, and a woman asked me for a selfie. And I said, oh, of course. And as soon as she took the selfie, I said, what I say to everybody, don't forget to tag me on Facebook or Instagram when you post the picture. And suddenly the woman's countenance changed, and she said, oh, I can't do that. I live in a very Democrat county, and my husband is self-employed. I can't do that. I gave a speech at this event an hour later. Now, I didn't mention her by name, but I said the story of what she did. And I said very harshly, you may consider it harsh, but I believe in it. If you are not prepared to put your face and your name to your values, you do not represent those values.
American values, what are they? What does the name Washington represent.
The founders knew of the dangers of a bureaucracy, the dangers of a government, regardless of how that government was elected, that became too powerful. More important than even the Bill of Rights is separation of powers and checks and balances. That meant that there would be no power by one branch without some check in the other. So, I encourage everybody to take a read of the Declaration of Independence, to learn about the history of what the founders were so upset about and why they decided to separate from King George and Parliament in Great Britain. And then think about what we're looking at here today. And it's a very, very scary thing. And now's the point that we have to stand up to that.
Why is the word creator capitalized and mentioned in our document? We are the only nation on God's earth that is founded on the principle of individual liberty and freedom, but based upon what? Some capricious decision of the founding fathers? No, they say you have unalienable rights because you are made in the image of your creator. That's otherwise the government can do whatever they want.